I work at a brokerage that sells online businesses, but it wouldn't be honest to say that buying an online business doesn't come without risks. Like buying any asset or investment, there are always risks, but doing it right can put you in a different financial league altogether. Retirement, not worrying about recession or layoffs or being able to take care of your family. These are all realities that online business owners that I've worked with and spoken with over the past 3 years every week have experienced by being able to do this right. So this is a reality that I want to help you also achieve. And to do this, you'll have to, or you'll want to avoid certain major risks associated with some of the major areas throughout buying an online business. Now, the first area is overvaluation. So pretty much, are you overpaying for a business? You want to ask yourself, how is the business being valued? Who is valuing the business? And what financial information are they using in order to calculate that valuation? So is this business being valued by a third-party source, or is it being valued by the seller directly? You should also look at a marketplace such as the Empire Flippers marketplace. And what I recommend is looking at businesses with a similar business model and just seeing what the listing price is for those businesses to get a ballpark estimate of kind of the range of the valuations, just to know whether or not the business that you're looking at falls within that range. Now, if you're buying a business privately, I still recommend hiring a third-party valuation professional to make sure that you're getting an unbiased calculation that isn't subjective or emotional or looking into the future about what the business could become. And if you're working with a brokerage like Empire Flippers, you'll actually have the opportunity to work with our sales advisors who will assist you in potentially negotiating a deal on your behalf with the seller of that business, so you could potentially get a more competitive deal on that business. Second are the legal protections, or more specifically, the contractual obligations. When you are entering into a purchase agreement with a seller, the terms of that contract are set up in such a way that protect both you and the seller, and that if one side violates those terms, the other party can either back out of the deal or they're entitled to something that protects their interest. So you want to make sure that your contract protects you in certain contingencies. For example, what if the seller has misrepresented something in their business and you find out that detail during the transfer process? Or what if during the transfer process there's something that significantly impacts the business to where the revenue has now decreased significantly? Or what if a seller wants to back out of a deal because they get seller's remorse during the transfer process, but you still want the business? So these are just an example of things that can and actually have happened while I've worked with some of these sellers and buyers. So your contract should include parameters that broadly protect you across these different contingencies. So at Empire Flippers, we draft the contract for you, and we can also help you customize the contract if there are certain details within the deal that need to be updated. Third are business liabilities. I'll just use Amazon FBA as an example. So Amazon sellers have an option to accept a line of credit from Amazon in order to make larger payments on inventory so that they can grow their business faster. Now, the issue with this is if a seller wants to sell their business while they still have an unpaid line of credit. So you want to make sure that when you're buying a business, you're not also unknowingly acquiring debt, or that if you are acquiring the debt, that it has been communicated and it has been accounted in the valuation itself. So at Empire Flippers, this is something that we communicate with our sellers. We determine if they do have, for example, a line of credit on their FBA account, and if they do, we make sure that that's communicated. And in many cases, we require the seller to pay that off prior to the business being sold. In some cases, certain sellers, if a buyer agrees to that, of course, the deal will be set up so that the funds that are paid towards the purchase of the business, part of those funds are used to actually cover any debts associated with the business. So it's still like the seller is paying for those debts, but it's through the sale of the business itself. Now, one distinguishing point is if the company itself that the seller owns, if that company has liabilities, that's different. When you're buying a business through Empire Flippers, you're not actually acquiring the company itself. You're not taking on their legal entity. You're buying a business or an asset within the company. So that's a fine distinction, because sometimes a seller might have certain liabilities or certain obligations, certain debts associated with their corporation, but with that asset in particular, you can still acquire that business without taking on certain debts. Now, fourth is dependence on a single traffic source or revenue source. So for certain business models, I'll use another easy example with Amazon FBA. Most Amazon sellers, their primary or their only traffic source is through Amazon organic traffic and Amazon PPC traffic, and their only revenue source or sales source are the sales that they do through Amazon. Now, to be clear, that's still definitely a risk, but it's a risk that a lot of Amazon FBA sellers and a lot of would-be owners, so a lot of buyers they understand and are willing to accept. However, when looking at other business models, let's say a content site, for example, you want to look at, ideally, a business that drives traffic through multiple sources and generates revenue through multiple sources. Ideally, not all content sites do this, but for example, multiple traffic sources being organic, of course, direct through an email list or through a social media accounts, maybe even through paid advertising. Multiple revenue sources being private affiliates from Amazon associates, from display advertising. Maybe they have an online course or an ebook, for example. And mostly you want to protect yourself from a single point of failure that could cause that business to essentially disappear overnight. Number 5 is the post-sales transfer process. This process is usually not even thought about for those who haven't bought a business before, but it's arguably as important as the sale itself. It's the process from once you agree to pay for the business, transferring those assets over to you to where you're now receiving the money and you have ownership over the entire business. It's not as simple as just receiving a username and password and just suddenly having ownership of the entire business. A business often comes with multiple different assets that all have their own method of transferring ownership. In some cases, there are certain terms of service that make it difficult to even transfer ownership over to you, or can make it time consuming or just very complex. So the first thing that I want to talk about regarding this transfer process is sending the money that you're paying for the business to a third-party escrow service. The reason why I bring this up is because this is the biggest form of leverage that you as a buyer have to incentivize a seller to follow through post-sale. In many cases, once you decide to buy the business, you both sign the contract and you send the funds somewhere, there could be potentially several months until the deal is actually complete. So you want to make sure that during those months that the seller is just as invested in completing the deal as you are in receiving the business as it was when you decided to buy it. And having your money in a third-party escrow where there are clear terms for when that money is released to the seller is a way to ensure that both parties adhere to the contract. Now, to be fair to sellers, most sellers love their business. They want to see it succeed into the future, and they want to see their legacy passed on to a buyer who can do some really great things with the business. But a lot of sellers also don't realize that the process of selling a business can become like a full-time job, and that alongside having to actually operate the business during this time can be very demanding. So if that is drawn out over the course of several months, that can be really overwhelming for a lot of sellers. So having this leverage in the form of these contractual requirements for getting paid when all of the assets are transferred over, that's going to be important in making sure that you come out of this with the business that you want. Now at Empire Flippers, we actually hold the funds on your behalf, and not every brokerage does this. So if you're shopping around for different brokerages, make sure you ask if they hold on to the funds, or if it goes to a third-party escrow, or if they are holding onto the funds, what are the terms under which a deal is considered complete, and also that the contract that you signed outlines the specific details of when the funds can be released. And last to the migration process are the technical issues themselves. Some of these platforms are not easy at all to transfer over. In fact, some of these platforms, like for AdSense, for example, they make it very difficult to actually transfer over ownership. So if you are going to be doing this privately through a private deal, you're gonna wanna make sure that you understand all of the assets involved in the business and how to transfer each of those in a way that abides by each of those companies' terms of service. I'd honestly recommend that you, if you're gonna do this privately, that you hire somebody with experience in transferring those assets. At Empire Flippers, we actually have a migrations department that oversees this process, that guides buyers and sellers through the transition process. And once that is complete, that's when the seller receives their funds. If you're working with another brokerage, I think Empire Flippers is actually the only brokerage that has a migrations department. So even other brokerages won't help you with this. You're kind of on your own. So you're still gonna have to hire somebody or do this yourself. So you're gonna have to make sure that you are well versed in how to transfer those different assets. A lot of these areas can be mitigated by working with a brokerage that provide these services. At Empire Flippers, we provide all of those services that I mentioned before, handling the legal contracts, holding the funds similar to an escrow, providing the migrations service, negotiating on your behalf. Now, this does not replace doing your own due diligence when you're evaluating businesses. You definitely should be carefully evaluating any business deal that you aim to purchase. But working with a brokerage that is experienced in vetting certain businesses, that often can help fill in a lot of gaps and tell you a lot of things that you should be looking into that maybe you didn't even realize you should be doing during your due diligence. So if you're entering into a private sale, then I still recommend hiring specialists for these specific services. Hiring a lawyer, and a lawyer that's versed in online business. Hiring a third-party escrow service. Hiring somebody to potentially migrate the different assets included in the sale. And if interested in how we do these things at Empire Flippers, I recommend speaking with a sales advisor. Or if you're just shopping around to different brokerages, I recommend you take these different points, these different questions, and you ask the brokerages about how they protect buyers. You're gonna sound like a professional at this if this is your first time buying a business. And also, if you want to feel more professional at performing your actual due diligence in evaluating businesses or finding businesses that would be right for you, then I recommend clicking on this video about how to find your perfect business in minutes on the Empire Flippers platform. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.